The Manhattan skyline glittered like nothing had ever broken. From the 47th floor of his glass penthouse overlooking Central Park, Adrian Sterling stood alone, jacket discarded over an Italian leather chair, his Rolex resting untouched beside a half-finished glass of bourbon. The city called him unstoppable. Wall Street called him ruthless. Forbes had called him visionary. Tonight, he felt none of it. His MacBook Pro screen reflected a man who hadn't slept in days. The market had turned. The board was whispering. The SEC investigation email still sat unopened in his inbox. For the first time in 15 years, Adrian wasn't sure he was in control. And control was the only thing he'd ever trusted. Without thinking too long, because thinking would stop him, he opened FaceTime. Eleanor Whitman. He hadn't said her name out loud in a year. His thumb hovered. His chest tightened. Then he pressed call. It rang longer than it should have. He almost ended it. Then the screen flickered. Ellie appeared, but she wasn't alone. The lighting was softer where she was, warm, not Manhattan steel and glass. Behind her, white curtains moved gently in ocean wind. She looked different, calmer, stronger, and in her arms, a baby. Adrian's brain refused to process it at first. His hand tightened around the edge of the marble counter. The bourbon glass tipped, spilling amber across stone. The baby shifted, tiny fingers gripping the fabric of her sweater. Dark hair, familiar eyes. His eyes. Silence stretched across the digital space between them. Ellie didn't look surprised. She didn't look afraid. She looked steady. "He's 6 months old," she said quietly. Adrian couldn't breathe. The most powerful man in the room, any room, stood frozen in his own home. "That's impossible," he whispered. Ellie adjusted the baby gently, her voice calm but unbreakable. "No," she said. "What was impossible was waiting for you to notice I was gone." And for the first time in his life, Adrian Sterling felt something truly slip beyond his control. By 7:30 a.m., Adrian Sterling was back in armor. The penthouse lights were off. The bourbon stain had been wiped clean. His Rolex was back on his wrist. Control restored, at least on the surface. His black Mercedes S-Class slid through Park Avenue traffic as Manhattan rushed toward another ruthless trading day. Screens in the back seat streamed overseas market data. Numbers moved, billions shifted, fortunes trembled. Adrian didn't blink. Sterling Capital occupied the top 20 floors of a steel and glass tower overlooking Midtown. The lobby smelled of polished marble and ambition. Employees straightened when he stepped inside. Conversations died mid-sentence. This was the Adrian Sterling the world knew. Decisive, surgical, unemotional. He walked into the executive boardroom without greeting anyone. His Montblanc pen rested precisely beside a leather portfolio. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a reminder of what he owned, or thought he did. "Tokyo closed down 2%, his CFO, Marcus Doyle, said smoothly. "But we can offset with the energy position." Adrian nodded once. "Liquidate 20%. Increase exposure in biotech." No hesitation. No doubt. Just command. The meeting moved fast. Charts, forecasts, strategy. Every executive watched him for signals, adjusting their tone to match his temperature. He had built this firm from a single borrowed office and a MacBook Air balanced on a folding table. Now, it controlled billions in assets. Power had been his language. Yet beneath the rhythm of financial dominance, something fractured quietly. When the meeting paused, Adrian's phone lit up. Unknown number. Cape Cod area code. His pulse shifted, barely noticeable to anyone else. He silenced it. Marcus leaned back casually. "Everything good?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Fine." But nothing was fine, because while he commanded markets, He couldn't command that image from last night. Ellie's steady eyes, the baby's small fingers, the way the word impossible had sounded weak in his own mouth. 6 months. 6 months of first smiles, first cries, first nights, and he hadn't known. The board resumed discussion about the SEC inquiry. Routine, they assured him. Temporary noise. Adrian stared out at the skyline. For the first time, Manhattan didn't look like a kingdom. It looked like a fortress, and he was suddenly unsure whether he had built it or locked himself inside. It had started with a photograph, not a confrontation, not a confession. Just an image sent anonymously to his private email at 1:12 a.m. Adrian remembered the exact time because he had been awake, reviewing Asian market projections on his MacBook Pro while Ellie slept alone in their bedroom. The subject line read, "You deserve to know." He almost deleted it. Instead, he opened the attachment. The photo showed Ellie outside a brownstone in Tribeca, snow falling lightly around her. A man stood close, too close, his hand resting at the small of her back. Ellie's head tilted toward him, her expression soft. Intimate. Adrian stared at the image until his vision blurred. He zoomed in. The timestamp in the corner claimed it had been taken that same evening, while he was hosting investors at the Plaza Hotel. He didn't call her immediately. That was the first mistake. Instead, he let the silence grow teeth. When he returned home after midnight, Ellie was sitting on the edge of the bed, reading. She looked up and smiled gently. "You're late," she said. He studied her face like a stranger. "Where were you tonight?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "At home. I told you I wasn't feeling well." The lie, what he believed was a lie, cut deeper than anger. He didn't show her the photo. He didn't ask for explanation. Adrian Sterling did not beg for truth. He withdrew. Over the next week, he became colder. Meetings ran longer. Dinners stretched past midnight. Cassandra Vale, his sharp and attentive communications director, began staying late to help manage press inquiries. Ellie tried to reach him, tried to touch his arm, tried to ask what had changed. "You're pulling away," she whispered one night. He looked at her with controlled detachment. "Maybe I'm just seeing things clearly now." The words wounded more than shouting ever could. 2 days later, he initiated a quiet separation agreement through his attorneys. No accusations, no public drama, just precision. Ellie stood in the kitchen, the Manhattan skyline glowing behind her through glass. "If you think I betrayed you," she said softly, "then you never really knew me." He didn't answer, then because believing the photograph was easier, then admitting he was already losing her long before it arrived. 3 weeks after the separation papers were signed, Adrian stood beneath crystal chandeliers at the Plaza Hotel, smiling for cameras that never blinked. The annual Sterling Capital Charity Gala was a Manhattan institution. Gold-trimmed invitations, black tie guest list, donors who measured generosity in 7 figures. The ballroom shimmered with polished marble and curated perfection. Adrian wore a custom tuxedo, posture flawless, expression composed. Beside him stood Cassandra Vale. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, calculated, not intimate. She wore a midnight blue Dior gown that caught the light with every movement. Reporters leaned forward, flashbulbs ignited. "Mr. Sterling, is this the new power couple of Wall Street?" Cassandra laughed softly, practiced and elegant. Adrian didn't correct the implication. He didn't confirm it either. He simply smiled. Inside, something hollowed deeper. The string quartet shifted into Mozart. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd with champagne flutes. Billionaires discussed venture capital over caviar. A senator approached Adrian, praising his resilience during personal transitions. Resilience. That was the word the press had chosen to describe his separation. No one mentioned Ellie's name anymore. No one asked where she had gone. Cassandra leaned closer. "You handled that beautifully," she murmured. "Investors like stability." Adrian nodded. Stability. Optics. Control. He glanced across the ballroom toward the terrace doors. Beyond the glass, Central Park shimmered under winter frost. Somewhere in that city, Ellie was packing her life into boxes he had never bothered to notice. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped aside, pretending to check market alerts. Instead, he opened social media. A photo had been posted 20 minutes earlier. Ellie, standing on a quiet beach at dusk, a small lighthouse in the distance. The caption read simply, "New beginnings." No mention of him. No bitterness. Just peace. For the first time that evening, Adrian's smile faltered. Cassandra noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" He locked the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "Perfect," he replied. But as applause filled the ballroom and donors pledged millions in his name, Adrian felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He had mastered public perception. He had mastered power. So yet watching Ellie walk away with dignity was the first moment he realized that control did not equal victory. And for the first time at the Plaza Hotel, Adrian Sterling felt small. Ellie found out on a Tuesday morning. The air in Manhattan still carried winter's bite, but inside the small Upper East Side clinic, everything felt too warm, too quiet. She sat alone in a vinyl chair, fingers twisting the sleeve of her sweater, staring at the white envelope the nurse had just handed her. Positive. The word didn't look real at first. She had counted the weeks wrong. Or maybe she hadn't wanted to count at all. The separation had been clinical, swift, almost polite. Lawyers, documents, signatures. Adrian had reduced the end of their marriage to efficiency. But life didn't move on legal timelines. Life had its own clock. So Ellie pressed a hand against her stomach, not yet showing, not yet visible to the world. A fragile secret. A heartbeat only she knew existed. She didn't call him. That decision would shape everything. On the cab ride back to the penthouse, she watched Fifth Avenue blur past the window. Tiffany's blue boxes in display cases, women in tailored coats, a city obsessed with image. Adrian had thrived here, but she suddenly felt like she was disappearing inside it. When she entered the penthouse for the last time, Adrian wasn't home. Of course he wasn't. His assistant had emailed earlier. Emergency board dinner. Late. Ellie moved through the glass-walled space slowly. The marble counters, the skyline view, the life that had looked perfect from the outside. She opened a drawer in the kitchen. Inside sat the sonogram appointment card she had scheduled, but not yet attended. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. If she told him now, would he believe her? After the photograph, after the silence, after the way he had looked at her like a liability instead of a wife. She already knew the answer. Ellie packed only what mattered. Clothes, personal documents, a small framed photo from before the money, before Wall Street, when Adrian used to laugh without checking his phone. She left the rest. That night, she booked a one-way ticket to Boston on her iPhone. No announcement. No goodbye speech. Just departure. By the time Adrian returned home past midnight, the closet was lighter. The air felt different. And inside her, unseen by him, a future was quietly growing. The SEC email arrived at 6:12 a.m. Adrian was already awake, sitting at the edge of his bed in the silent penthouse, staring at the ocean blue contact name still saved in his phone. Eleanor. He hadn't slept. He hadn't stopped replaying the image of the baby on her screen. 6 months. 6 months he didn't exist in his own child's life. His phone buzzed again. Urgent. Notice of formal inquiry. He opened the email. The Securities and Exchange Commission was launching a preliminary investigation into irregular offshore movements connected to Sterling Capital's energy division. Adrian's jaw tightened. Irregular. He didn't do irregular. Within 40 minutes, he was in the back of his Mercedes S-Class, midtown traffic crawling as Manhattan woke around him. He scanned financial summaries on his iPad, pulse steady but sharper than usual. At the office, tension lingered like static. Executives avoided eye contact. Assistants whispered. News had spread faster than he anticipated. Marcus Doyle was already waiting in the boardroom. "Morning," Marcus said smoothly, coffee untouched in front of him. "It's procedural. We've weathered worse." Adrian sat down slowly. "Walk me through it." Marcus pulled up charts, offshore subsidiaries, transfer dates, energy hedges, numbers that technically aligned, but felt slightly off rhythm. Too perfect. "Who authorized these reallocations?" Adrian asked. Marcus didn't hesitate. "You did. Last quarter. Emergency market shift." Adrian's mind flipped through memory like files in a cabinet. Had he? Last quarter had been chaos. Investor pressure. Gala season. Ellie leaving. He had signed dozens of documents without reading every line. For the first time in his career, doubt flickered. Not about the market. About himself. His phone vibrated again. Cape Cod. He ignored it. Marcus leaned forward, voice calm. "We just need to present a unified front. No internal fractures." Unified. The word echoed strangely. Adrian stood and walked to the window. Manhattan stretched endlessly below, steel and glass reflecting morning sun. He had built an empire on control. But now, his wife was gone. His child was hidden. The government was investigating. And the only man he trusted inside this building was telling him everything was fine. For the first time in 15 years, Adrian Sterling wasn't sure which threat was more dangerous, the one outside his company or the one already sitting at his table. Adrian didn't announce his arrival. He didn't bring a press team. He didn't bring lawyers. He didn't bring Cassandra. He brought himself. The rented black SUV rolled through a quiet Cape Cod street just after sunrise. The ocean air looked different from Manhattan air, lighter, almost forgiving. Small bookstores, white-painted houses, wind brushing through tall grass instead of skyscrapers. This was where she had gone. He stepped out, coat collar lifted against the cold, heart pounding harder than it ever had before a board vote. The house was modest. White siding, blue shutters. A wooden sign near the porch read, "Harbor Light Books and Coffee." She had built something. Without him. Adrian stood at the door longer than necessary. The man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions suddenly felt unsure how to knock. Finally, he did. Footsteps approached slowly. The door opened. Ellie stood there, no makeup. Hair loosely tied back. She looked tired, but steady, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You came," she said simply. "I needed to," he replied. Inside, the space smelled of coffee and paper. Shelves lined the walls. A small playmat sat near the window. And then, he heard it. A soft coo. Ellie turned slightly. "He's awake." Adrian's breath caught. She walked toward a bassinet near the couch and gently lifted the baby into her arms. The child blinked against morning light, tiny fingers stretching. "This is Samuel," she said. Not accusation, not drama, just truth. Adrian stepped closer slowly, as if approaching something sacred. The baby's eyes opened fully. Dark, curious, familiar. Samuel studied him without fear. And then, unexpectedly, the baby reached out. A small hand closed around Adrian's finger. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was instinct. And something inside Adrian broke open. His throat tightened. His vision blurred. He had negotiated wars between investors. He had survived market crashes. But this was something he couldn't strategize. Samuel made a soft sound, almost like a word. Duh. Ellie watched Adrian carefully. He swallowed hard, voice barely steady. I didn't know. Ellie met his eyes. Not angry, not soft. You didn't ask. And in that quiet Cape Cod living room, Adrian Sterling felt the weight of 6 missing months settle into his chest like a debt no market could repay. Adrian had faced federal regulators with less anxiety. The pediatric clinic in Hyannis was small, painted in soft blues and pale yellows. Nothing like the polished Manhattan medical centers where executives moved through private entrances. Here, on toddlers' stacked plastic blocks in the waiting area, a nurse called names without ceremony. Samuel sat in Ellie's lap, chewing on the corner of a cloth blanket, unaware that the adults around him were holding their breath. Adrian stood by the window, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the parking lot as if it were a trading floor before a crash. He had asked for the test. The words had tasted wrong the moment they left his mouth. Not because I doubt you, he had said. Ellie hadn't argued. She hadn't cried. She had simply nodded. If that's what you need to believe him, she replied quietly. Now, 20 minutes later, the doctor stepped in holding a thin manila envelope. Mr. Sterling? Adrian turned. The room felt smaller. The doctor handed him the document. Standard procedure. Buccal swab comparison. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. Clinical. Precise. Irrefutable. Adrian stared at the numbers, his name printed beside the word, father. He had demanded certainty. Now, certainty was cutting through him like glass. Ellie watched him carefully, not triumphant, not defensive, just tired. You really thought I'd lie about something like this? She asked softly. He opened his mouth but couldn't form an answer. Because the truth wasn't about her, it was about him. He had believed the photograph, believed silence, believed distance. He had allowed doubt to live where trust should have been. And in doing so, he had missed the first 6 months of his son's life. Samuel made a small sound and reached toward him again. Instinctively, Adrian stepped closer. This time, he didn't hesitate. He lifted his son into his arms. Samuel settled easily against his chest, tiny heartbeat steady against the expensive fabric of Adrian's coat. No stock price had ever felt this fragile. No negotiation had ever mattered this much. Ellie's voice broke the silence. Now you know, she said. The question is what you're going to do with it. And for the first time in his empire-building life, Adrian Sterling realized that proof wasn't the victory. Responsibility was. Adrian returned to Manhattan with Samuel's weight still lingering in his arms. The city looked sharper now, louder, less important. Sterling Capital's glass tower reflected the afternoon sun, as if nothing had shifted. But inside, something had. Olivia Chen was waiting outside his office when he stepped off the elevator. She had been his executive assistant for 7 years, efficient, observant. Loyal in the quiet way that didn't beg for recognition. You need to see this, she said, lowering her voice. Adrian closed the office door behind them. The skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely glanced at it. Olivia placed a slim silver flash drive on his desk. It came from IT, backup server logs. Someone accessed your private email archive the night before the separation. Adrian's jaw tightened. Who? She hesitated. The login trace leads to Marcus Doyle's credentials. The room went silent. That's not possible, Adrian said automatically. Marcus had been with him from the beginning. The folding table office, the first investor pitch, the first win. Olivia opened a file on his iMac. The screen displayed metadata, timestamps, IP addresses, file modifications. There it was. The photograph. The same image of Ellie and Tribeca. But now, side by side with the original. The original showed Ellie standing alone outside the brownstone, speaking to an older man several feet away, clearly a property manager. No touch, no intimacy. The altered version had been digitally manipulated, a man inserted, a hand added, shadows adjusted. Adrian's pulse pounded in his ears. Who else had access? He asked. Olivia swallowed. Cassandra Vale was logged into the communications server within minutes of the edit. The pieces began aligning too cleanly. The anonymous email, the timing, the separation. Cassandra's sudden rise in proximity. Marcus urging unity during the SEC inquiry. Betrayal had layers, and Adrian had been blind. He sank slowly into his chair, staring at the screen. Not at the manipulation, but at himself. And he had believed the lie because it matched his pride, because doubting Ellie was easier than confronting his own distance. Olivia's voice was careful. There's more. Offshore fund transfers connected to Marcus, and Cassandra's name appears on the approval chain. The empire wasn't cracking. It was being carved from inside. Adrian stood abruptly. For the first time in months, his voice carried something different. Not arrogance, clarity. Schedule a full board review, he said quietly. Because the photograph hadn't destroyed his marriage. His ego had. And now, the truth was coming for everyone involved. The emergency board meeting was held at the Ritz-Carlton in Midtown. Neutral territory, private, controlled, or so Adrian had believed. The conference room overlooked 6th Avenue, muted city noise humming beneath thick glass. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table. Attorneys present. 2 compliance officers dialed in remotely. Marcus Doyle arrived 10 minutes early. Cassandra Vale entered 5 minutes after him. Adrian walked in last. He didn't carry his usual leather portfolio, just a single tablet in his hand. The atmosphere was wrong from the start. Too prepared. Marcus stood first. Before we begin, I believe it's important to address the growing instability at Sterling Capital. Instability. The word landed like bait. Adrian remained seated. Cassandra followed smoothly. Investor confidence has been shaken by personal distractions. Media outlets are preparing to connect the SEC inquiry to leadership integrity. She didn't look at him when she said it. She didn't need to. Marcus clicked a remote. The screen lit up. Headlines. A speculation. A leaked rumor implying Adrian had manipulated offshore energy hedges for personal gain. Adrian's eyes sharpened. These documents haven't gone public, he said quietly. Marcus met his gaze. Not yet. The implication was clear. Resign, or be destroyed. One board member cleared his throat. Adrian, is there anything we should know regarding internal irregularities? Cassandra leaned back calmly, hands folded, perfectly composed. For a brief second, Adrian saw the entire trap. The forged photograph, the email breach, the offshore transfers routed through Marcus, and now, a coordinated attempt to remove him before the truth surfaced. He stood slowly. You're right, Adrian said evenly. There is something you should know. He tapped his tablet. The screen shifted. Server logs, timestamp discrepancies, or image manipulation metadata. Cassandra's smile faltered. Barely. Marcus didn't move. Adrian's voice was steady. The photograph used to justify my separation was altered. The offshore transfers were approved through credentials not personally verified by me, and both digital trails lead back to this room. Silence thickened. Marcus finally spoke, calm but sharper. Be careful with accusations. Adrian held his gaze. I am. Outside, Manhattan continued as if nothing had changed. But inside that boardroom, alliances were cracking. Power was shifting. And for the first time since this began, Adrian wasn't the one on the defensive. He was ready to expose the architects of his collapse, even if it cost him everything. The silence inside the Ritz-Carlton boardroom was no longer strategic. It was fragile. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. The attorneys whispered. Marcus sat still, but a faint tension had crept into his jaw. Cassandra's posture remained elegant, yet her fingers were no longer relaxed. They pressed tightly together on the table. Adrian had just projected the metadata proving manipulation. But evidence alone wasn't enough. He knew that. And then, there was a knock at the door. Every head turned. The boardroom doors opened slowly. Ellie stepped inside. No designer gown, no Manhattan polish, just a simple navy coat and quiet composure. Her presence didn't demand attention. It commanded it. Adrian hadn't told her to come, which meant she had chosen to. Behind her walked an older man in a tailored gray suit, Thomas Whitman, former federal attorney, Ellie's father. Marcus visibly stiffened. Cassandra blinked once. Thomas spoke first. Gentlemen, ladies, I believe you're discussing digital fraud and fiduciary misconduct. His voice carried authority that didn't need volume. One of the board members frowned. And you are? Former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Thomas replied calmly. Retired, but not uninformed. Ellie stepped forward. Her eyes met Adrian's for a brief second. Not romantic, not soft, just steady. Then she addressed the room. The photograph used to justify our separation was fabricated, she said evenly. And I have sworn affidavits from the property manager in Tribeca, confirming he was alone that evening. She placed printed statements on the table. No drama, just truth. Marcus attempted to interject. This is a personal matter. Thomas cut him off. It became corporate when altered evidence was used to destabilize executive leadership during a pending SEC inquiry. Cassandra's calm cracked slightly. You have no proof of intent. Adrian tapped his tablet again. A final document appeared on the screen. Offshore transfers, authorization codes, Marcus's encrypted approval signature. The room shifted. The board chairman leaned forward slowly. Marcus, he said carefully, is this accurate? For the first time since this began, Marcus didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, the balance of power tipped. The silence in the Ritz-Carlton boardroom didn't break, it shattered. Marcus finally leaned back in his chair, forcing a thin smile. This is circumstantial. Digital logs can be manipulated. Thomas Whitman didn't flinch. They can, he agreed calmly. But federal forensic auditors tend to notice when they are. Cassandra's composure was slipping faster now. Her eyes darted toward Marcus, not subtle, not confident. Adrian watched the shift carefully. For months, he had been reacting. Now he was observing. The board chairman cleared his throat. We need outside counsel immediately. You already have it, Thomas replied. The SEC was provided with these records 48 hours ago. That landed. Marcus's head snapped toward Adrian. You went to the SEC? Adrian's voice was quiet. You thought I wouldn't? Before Marcus could respond, there was another knock at the door. This one firmer. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, badges visible. Marcus Doyle? One of them asked. The room froze. Marcus stood halfway. This is ridiculous. Sir, we have a warrant regarding securities fraud and obstruction of a federal inquiry. No shouting. No dramatic chase. Just inevitability. Cassandra's face drained of color. The agent continued. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus's eyes locked on Adrian's. Betrayal, anger, calculation. You're destroying your own company, Marcus muttered. Adrian didn't raise his voice. You tried to. The agents guided Marcus toward the door. No struggle, just quiet collapse. Board members stared, stunned. A man who had helped build Sterling Capital was now walking out in handcuffs through a luxury hotel corridor. Cassandra stood abruptly. "I had no knowledge of offshore movements." Adrian turned toward her slowly. "But you had knowledge of the photograph." She didn't answer, because she couldn't. The chairman looked at Cassandra. "So effective immediately. You are suspended pending investigation." Her ambition, so carefully polished at galas and press conferences, crumbled in seconds. As the doors closed behind the agents, the room felt different, cleaner. Adrian exhaled slowly. He hadn't won. Not yet. His marriage was still broken. His son had grown 6 months without him. But for the first time, the lies were no longer controlling the narrative, and the people who built them were finally facing the consequences. Cassandra didn't wait for security to escort her. She walked out of the Ritz-Carlton boardroom with her chin lifted, shoulders squared, heels clicking sharply against polished marble, as if she were still in control of the narrative. But Manhattan had already begun turning. By sunset, our financial news outlets were running breaking headlines. Sterling Capital CFO arrested in federal investigation. Communications director under review. Cassandra's phone buzzed relentlessly as she sat alone in her Upper East Side apartment. Calls from reporters, messages from investors. One from a fashion editor who had once begged her for an exclusive interview. Now, silence from the board. Silence from power. She opened her laptop, scrolling through the damage. Social media was merciless. Screenshots of old gala photos resurfaced, her hand on Adrian's arm at the plaza. Captions speculating about ambition and proximity. Speculation had turned into suspicion. Her email inbox chimed. "Effective immediately. Your access to all Sterling Capital systems has been revoked." She inhaled sharply. They were distancing themselves. From her. The irony tasted bitter. For months, she had orchestrated perception, planted narratives, adjusted optics. She had believed Adrian was predictable, too proud to question a fracture in his marriage, too distracted to notice numbers shifting behind him. She had underestimated 2 things: Ellie's quiet strength and Adrian's capacity to learn. A second email arrived. Subpoena notice. Her hand trembled slightly. This wasn't a social setback. This was legal. Across town, Adrian stood by the window of his office, watching dusk settle over the Manhattan skyline. Olivia Chen stood behind him, holding a tablet. "Public sentiment is stabilizing," she said carefully. "Investors are responding well to the transparency." Adrian nodded once. He didn't feel victorious. He felt sober, because exposing Cassandra hadn't repaired what he'd broken at home. A justice inside a boardroom did not equal redemption in a living room. As night settled over the city, Cassandra stared at her reflection in the darkened screen of her laptop. The empire she tried to seize was still standing, and she was no longer inside it. Ambition had carried her upward, but deceit had carried her out. And for the first time in her carefully curated life, Cassandra Vale had no narrative left to control. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. Adrian stood behind the podium in Sterling Capital's main lobby, the Manhattan skyline visible through towering glass panels behind him. Reporters filled every available space. Cameras blinked red. Microphones bearing network logos crowded the front row. For years, he had spoken here about growth, returns, expansion. Today was different. He adjusted the microphone slightly. No prepared teleprompter. No rehearsed PR spin. "I've called this conference to address recent events," he began evenly, "and to accept responsibility where it belongs." The word responsibility hung heavier than any accusation. He continued, "While internal fraud has been uncovered and appropriate legal actions are underway, there is a personal failure that began long before this investigation." The room shifted. This wasn't the expected narrative. I allowed ambition to distort my judgment, Adrian said. I believed a falsified image without seeking truth. I questioned the integrity of someone who had earned my trust. He didn't say Ellie's name. He didn't need to. I chose ego over conversation, distance over humility. Cameras flashed more rapidly. One reporter raised a hand. "Are you referring to your former spouse, Mr. Sterling?" Adrian met her gaze directly. "Yes." A murmur moved through the room. He continued calmly. "Leadership is not only about profit margins, it's about accountability, and I failed at that in my personal life." The admission wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. "I am committed to rebuilding trust, within this company and within my family, not through statements, through actions." He stepped away from the podium without taking further questions. No shouting, no grand defense, just ownership. Up in Cape Cod, Ellie watched the live stream on her tablet while Samuel played on the rug beside her. She hadn't expected him to speak publicly. Adrian had always guarded vulnerability like a liability. Samuel babbled happily, unaware that his father was dismantling pride on national television. Ellie's expression didn't soften immediately, but something changed, because apology delivered in private could be strategic. Apology delivered in public carried risk, and for the first time since everything collapsed, Adrian Sterling had risked something real. Not money, not reputation, but ego. And that was a different kind of currency altogether. Adrian didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring a watch from Fifth Avenue or a diamond box from Tiffany's. He brought time. The bookstore bell chimed softly as he stepped inside Harbor Light Books and coffee just before closing. The late afternoon sun spilled through the front windows, warming the wooden floors. A chalkboard sign near the counter read, "Fresh blueberry scones." It felt nothing like Manhattan. Ellie stood behind the counter, tying an apron string behind her back. She looked up, and surprised, but not startled. "You didn't call," she said. "I didn't want you to feel obligated to answer," Adrian replied. There was no security team outside, no black SUV waiting at the curb, just him. Samuel sat in a playpen near the children's section, stacking soft blocks. When he saw Adrian, his face brightened instantly. That look hit harder than any headline. Adrian crouched down slowly, letting Samuel reach for him first. The baby's small hand wrapped around his thumb again, steady and trusting. Ellie watched quietly. "I meant what I said," Adrian began. "At the press conference." She crossed her arms gently. "Public words are easy." "I know." He nodded. "That's why I'm not here with words." He looked around the bookstore, at the shelves she had arranged, the community bulletin board, the framed photo of Samuel near the register. You built something," he said, "without my money, without my name." "I built peace," she corrected softly. That landed. Adrian stood again, meeting her eyes fully. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't expect us to rewind." He paused carefully. "But I want to earn my place in his life. Not with checks, not with lawyers, with consistency." Ellie studied him. No defensiveness, no charm, no performance, just humility. "You don't get to visit when it's convenient," she said firmly. "He's not a weekend accessory." "I know." Silence stretched between them, not tense, but honest. Finally, Ellie nodded once. "Then you start small," she said. "Saturday mornings, story time." Adrian exhaled slowly. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It wasn't a romantic victory. But it was something real. And for the first time, Adrian Sterling wasn't trying to win. He was trying to deserve. It happened on a Thursday. Adrian had just landed back in Boston after a late investor meeting when Ellie's name flashed across his phone. It wasn't their usual scheduled call. It was 9:47 p.m. He answered immediately. "Samuel has a fever," Ellie said, her voice controlled, but tight. It spiked fast. "I'm on my way," Adrian replied without hesitation. He didn't ask if she needed him. He didn't calculate optics. He didn't check his calendar. He drove straight to Cape Cod. By the time he reached the small regional hospital, the ocean wind had picked up. The fluorescent lights inside felt harsh, exposing worry in ways no boardroom ever had. Ellie was sitting in a plastic chair beside a narrow hospital bed. Samuel lay small beneath a thin blanket, cheeks flushed, breathing uneven. Adrian's chest tightened. "He was fine this morning," Ellie whispered. Then it just rose. A nurse entered gently. "It's likely viral. We're monitoring. You caught it early." Adrian stepped closer to the bed, resting his hand lightly against Samuel's tiny foot. Warm. Too warm. He had never felt so powerless. In Manhattan, he could move markets with a sentence. Here, he could only wait. Hours passed slowly. Ellie hadn't eaten. Neither had he. Vending machine coffee sat untouched between them. At one point, Ellie's shoulders sagged from exhaustion. Without thinking, Adrian placed his jacket around her. She didn't pull away. Near midnight, Samuel stirred weakly and opened his eyes. When he saw Adrian, he made a faint sound. Recognition. Adrian leaned closer. "I'm here," he murmured. And he meant it. No, not for the evening, not for optics, but permanently. The doctor returned just after 1 a.m. "The fever is responding. He'll be okay." Relief flooded the room, quiet but overwhelming. Ellie closed her eyes briefly, exhaling. Adrian didn't celebrate. He didn't make promises. He simply stayed. Through the night, through every temperature check, through every small cry. And sometime around dawn, as Samuel finally slept peacefully between them. Ellie looked at Adrian differently, not as the man who had failed, but as the man who had shown up, consistently. And sometimes, that's where healing truly begins. 2 weeks after the hospital night, Adrian stood once again in Sterling Capital's executive boardroom. But this time, he wasn't defending himself. He was choosing. The quarterly projections glowed across the massive screen. Energy derivatives positioned for explosive short-term returns. The numbers were aggressive, risk-heavy, highly profitable. One board member leaned forward. "If we move now, we outperform every major fund this quarter." Another added, "The volatility window won't last." Adrian listened without interrupting. Before, this kind of opportunity would have electrified him. He built his empire by moving faster than caution. But something had shifted. He glanced down at his phone resting beside his Mont Blanc pen. A photo filled the screen. Samuel sitting on the bookstore floor, holding a board book upside down, smiling like the world was safe. The risk model reappeared on screen. High exposure, regulatory gray zones, legal but ethically questionable. He stood slowly. "So we're not taking it," Adrian said. The room stiffened. "Excuse me," one director replied. "We're reallocating to long-term sustainable infrastructure," Adrian continued evenly. "Lower margin, stable growth." "That cuts projected profit by at least 18%, someone argued. Adrian nodded once. "It does." The chairman studied him carefully. "This is a significant strategic shift." "Yes," Adrian agreed. "It is." Silence spread across the table. He met each board member's eyes. "We built this firm on speed and aggression. That's how we grew. But I won't risk reputational damage for short-term gain again. Not after what we just survived." The unspoken truth hovered in the room. Not after what I almost lost. Finally, the chairman leaned back. "Very well. Draft the new allocation." The meeting adjourned without applause. In the elevator down, Olivia Chen looked at him thoughtfully. "You would have taken that deal 6 months ago," she said quietly. "I know." Outside, Manhattan roared as always, indifferent to internal revolutions. But Adrian didn't feel the same urgency, because this time he wasn't building dominance. He was building stability, not just for investors, but for the little boy waiting in Cape Cod, who deserved a father known for integrity, not just ambition. Cassandra Vale thought she could negotiate her way out. She had done it before, redirected blame, reframed narratives, softened headlines with carefully crafted statements. But federal investigations didn't respond to charm, and judges didn't measure intent by elegance. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan was stark, stripped of glamour. No chandeliers, no camera flashes, just wood benches, sealed evidence folders, and quiet gravity. Adrian didn't attend for spectacle. He attended for closure. He sat in the back row, hands folded, expression unreadable. Not vengeful, not triumphant, simply present. Cassandra stood before the judge in a tailored gray suit that once signaled power. Today it looked smaller on her, controlled, defensive. The charges were clear: conspiracy to manipulate digital evidence, obstruction of a federal financial inquiry, facilitation of unauthorized offshore transfers. Marcus had already accepted a plea deal. Cassandra had tried to deny knowledge. The forensic trail denied her back. The judge's voice was steady. Ambition does not excuse deception, and professional proximity does not grant immunity. A pause. Then sentencing. 18 months federal custody, financial penalties, permanent disqualification from executive roles in publicly traded companies. It wasn't cinematic, it was final. Cassandra's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't cry. Pride held longer than power ever had. As she was escorted out, her eyes briefly met Adrian's. No apology, no hatred, just recognition. He didn't look away. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but Adrian avoided them. He stepped into the cool Manhattan air, the skyline rising behind him. Still his city, but no longer his identity. Justice hadn't restored his marriage. It hadn't erased 6 lost months. But it had restored truth. And truth mattered. His phone buzzed. A picture from Ellie. Samuel in a tiny knit sweater, standing with help for the first time. Adrian smiled. Quiet. Genuine. Cassandra had gambled on control. Marcus had gambled on greed. Both had fallen. But Adrian understood something now that he hadn't before. Consequences don't destroy you. They reveal you. And this time, he was choosing to be revealed differently. The beach was nearly empty that evening. Cape Cod carried a different kind of silence in early spring. Wind brushing across tall dune grass, waves folding gently against the shore. The sky burned soft gold as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Samuel sat in the sand between them, gripping a bright red plastic shovel like it was a trophy. Every few seconds, he looked up to make sure both of them were still there. They were. Adrian had been coming every weekend for months now. Saturday story time at the bookstore. Sunday morning walks along the harbor. No missed calls. No canceled flights. Consistency had replaced grand gestures. Ellie stood with her shoes in her hand, her bare feet pressed into cool sand. She looked peaceful in a way Manhattan had never allowed her to be. Adrian watched Samuel attempt to stand on unsteady legs. Instinctively, he reached out, but stopped himself, letting the boy try first. Progress required patience. "Why today?" Ellie asked quietly. He had asked her to meet him here after closing the bookstore. Adrian inhaled slowly. "Because I don't want to propose to the version of you I hurt," he said. "And I don't want to erase what happened." Ellie studied him carefully. "I'm not asking you to forget," he continued. "I'm asking if you believe we've built something new." Samuel lost balance and fell gently into the sand. Instead of crying, he laughed. Adrian smiled. "That," he said softly, nodding toward their son, "is what I want to protect." Ellie's expression shifted, not guarded, not fully surrendered, but open. Adrian reached into his coat pocket. Not a dramatic velvet box, not a spectacle, just a simple platinum band. "No gala, no press," he said. "No penthouse promises, just partnership." He stepped closer. "I don't need to own the skyline," Adrian whispered. "I need to deserve this family." Ellie's eyes glistened slightly. "For the first time," she said, "you're not asking to win." He shook his head. "I'm asking to stay." Samuel crawled toward them, grabbing both their hands at once, and as the ocean moved steadily behind them, Ellie nodded. 1 year later, Manhattan looked different. Not because the skyline had changed, because he had. Adrian stood at the edge of Central Park on a crisp autumn morning, leaves scattering across the pathway in shades of amber and gold. Joggers passed, and street musicians tuned violins. The city hummed with its usual relentless rhythm, but he wasn't rushing toward a tower of glass and steel. He was pushing a stroller. Samuel sat bundled in a navy sweater, pointing excitedly at pigeons as if they were rare discoveries. Every few steps, he turned to make sure both his parents were still within reach. They were. Ellie walked beside Adrian, her hand brushing his. Not possessive, not performative. Steady. Real. Sterling capital had stabilized. The restructuring had taken months. Profits were leaner, slower, but solid. Investors trusted transparency more than flash. The board respected boundaries he once ignored. He still wore tailored suits. He still carried a Mont Blanc pen. But those objects no longer defined him. On weekends, he read picture books on a bookstore rug. On weeknights, he took the last train from Boston after meetings instead of staying for networking cocktails. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was no longer empty. It was quieter, but warmer. Ellie's framed coastal photographs lined the walls. A small bookshelf stood where a decorative sculpture once had. Samuel's laughter echoed differently than market applause ever had. As they stopped near Bethesda Fountain, Adrian crouched down and lifted his son from the stroller. Samuel wrapped his arms around his father's neck without hesitation. That trust was earned. Ellie watched them, sunlight catching in her hair. "You're thinking," she said softly. Adrian smiled. "I used to measure success in numbers," he admitted. "Returns, growth, market dominance." He looked at his family. "Now I measure it in consistency." No cameras captured this moment, or no headlines announced it, but it mattered more than any gala speech ever had, because power had built his empire. Loss had humbled him. Truth had corrected him. And love had rebuilt him. As the Manhattan skyline rose behind them, no longer a fortress, but simply a backdrop, Adrian Sterling understood something he once would have dismissed. Winning the market had made him wealthy. Staying for his family had made him whole. And just like that, the story comes to a close. But my wonderful friends, you're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with this journey all the way to this moment, then something in this story must have touched your heart in some quiet, personal way. Maybe it reminded you that success without love is empty. Maybe it showed you that ego can cost us the very people we need most. Or maybe it simply whispered a truth we often forget. It's never too late to change. Adrian learned that control is not strength. Responsibility is. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Adrian could not control the past. He could only control who he chose to become next. And that choice, humble, consistent, honest, rebuilt everything. This story reminds us that pride isolates, but accountability heals. That showing up matters more than showing off. That love isn't proven in grand gestures, but in quiet, repeated presence. So now let me ask you gently, where in your own life do you need to choose humility over ego? Where do you need to show up more consistently? And if this story spoke to you, if it reflected something real inside you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes healing begins with simply listening, and sometimes it begins with staying. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes. While it references real locations such as Manhattan, Central Park, and the Ritz-Carlton, as well as commonly recognized public brands, all characters, events, and situations portrayed in this video are entirely fictional and not based on any real individuals or specific legal cases. The financial investigations, corporate decisions, and legal proceedings described are dramatized elements designed to explore themes of accountability, integrity, redemption, and family values. No real company, organization, or person is being represented or accused of misconduct. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The purpose of this content is to inspire reflection on personal growth, responsibility, and emotional healing, not to provide financial, legal, or professional advice.